Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and whenever I'm in this part of the galaxy, I listen to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Makes flying a little more tolerable. Don't tell Anakin.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And as we do on every Monday lately, we're starting the week with another episode of The Clone Wars. But before we get into that, Jay, where can we be found around the internet?
All right. I love starting our week this way. Can I just say we are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are covering episode 20 of season 1 of the Clone Wars, which is known as The Innocence of Ryloth. It's the second in a 3-episode arc. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary for this one, please?
Absolutely. When Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu attempt to begin their invasion of Ryloth, stiff cannon fire from the Separatist droid army forces Master Windu's craft to retreat. Obi-Wan Kenobi then leads a squad of clones on a mission to disable the plans so the invasion can commence. 2 clones, Waxer and Boyle, get separated from the rest of the squad and befriend a small Twi'lek child named Numa. After some initial resistance, Numa shows Obi-Wan and the clones how to get to the Separatist cannons. Obi-Wan and his men free the Twi'lek prisoners and destroy the cannons, which allows the invasion to commence.
All right. So, yeah, again, the second episode of a 3-episode story arc here, and the invasion is moving into its next phase after Anakin and Ahsoka broke the blockade around the planet to get them this far. What did you think about this episode overall?
Well, I mean, this arc in general is definitely one of my favorites in all of Clone Wars, I will say. And there's a few things, reasons for it. I mean, there's a lot of near and dear to my heart kinds of things. I mean, and you notice I go back and forth between saying Twi'lek and Twi'lek. And I notice in these episodes, it's mentioned Twi'lek, but then there's a lot of pronunciation as Twi'lek as well. So I guess it's tomato. But at any rate, there's a lot of, again, foundational things that happen in this episode that we get to see capitalized on much later. And even in Rebels, as we see, Numa going on to become her own little freedom fighter. And so it was just so wonderful to revisit this and just to get back into looking at this from the Clone Wars aspect of things and just realizing that as this was airing, again, this is supposed to be a children's show, but it kept getting into my mind that I was thinking, oh my gosh, like there's really some major themes going on here. And, even down to using the Twi'leks as human shields. I mean, that's big time for a kid's show, something that's, right out there. But overall, it's such a great episode. What do you think?
Indeed. Yeah, it's a great outline of what our discussion is going to be here. Good job. Yeah, no, I really like this episode. It's, again, season 1 of the Clone Wars is one that I've seen so many times. And especially since, again, my boys were very small. Clone Wars was their introduction to Star Wars at the time. And so these episodes just were on all the time in my house. And this one is just fantastic. One, Obi-Wan Kenobi is cool. We got some good clones. Waxer and Boyle are also pretty cool in this episode as well. And yeah, some of the messages that they get across here and some of the themes that they explore work really, really well in this. And it's not an episode to be overlooked in the least bit here. But let's go ahead and kind of start at the top, and we're going to skip around as we get through some of our discussion here. And we're not going to do a story beat by story beat, but anyway. Again, they're trying to land their invasion force at this city on Ryloth and Nabat is what it's called. But the tactical droid that's there has prepared a trap, and it's these cannons. And so one of the ships pretty much gets shot down, and then they forced to retreat. But this is after Obi-Wan and the clones are already aboard their gunships coming in for the landing, and a bunch of those get shot down while they're at it. But they got to take care of the cannons before they can get the invasion force in there. And as they're making their descent, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Commander Cody are giving orders to the squad, which is that, we're going into a standardless landing zone, but remember, we're here to free the Twi'leks, not destroy their homes. It occurs to me, I've just said both Twi'leks and Twi'leks in the same description here, but here we go. And so they're supposed to use blasters and poppers only, no heavy weaponry there, and, check your targets and the like. And some of the clones are kind of grousing about this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the themes of this episode is that, and Henry Gilroy wrote this, was that they wanted to kind of explore the effect of this galactic conflict on the everyman, on the common person here. And the clones aren't used to that type of interaction. They get deployed on the battlefield, they destroy the enemy, and they move on in this. But they're moving into an occupied place. And so it's just kind of like, they even use like kind of that derogative term for Twi'leks at this episode, the tailheads,
Yes.
I think
Mm-hmm.
a few times. But this kind of humanizes is not the right word because they're not human, but you know what I mean? It just kind of makes these people real and their struggle real over the course of the episode, especially for the likes of Waxer and Boyle.
Right. Well, I mean, the fortune cookie is the costs of war can never truly be accounted for. So, I mean, that really hits the mark, with the whole theme of this. And, to your point, when you were talking about the clones just wanting to go in and just do their thing and not wanting to deal with these tailheads and so on and so forth. I mean, there's definitely a complete turnaround, especially for Waxer and Boyle, obviously with Numa. But what was also interesting was there was sort of this discussion that the clones were having as they were walking through part of the town. And one of them had said, it's not just about the building, it's about the people. So I thought, okay, that's kind of a complete 180 from what they were just talking about in the gunship, as opposed to just going in there and, kicking butt and taking names. So there's obviously been some kind of experience that they've had with people, working with people, not just with going in and taking over things and actually fighting. So I just thought that was really interesting. But it was also very, I guess, philosophical in my own brain pan to think to myself that, okay, well, where do a lot of these attitudes come from with the clones? As far as, they've had such small window of experiences at this point, even though we look at them as being full grown adults, we know that they were accelerated and, they've not been exposed to as many social types of oh experiences, I guess is the best way
Sure.
that I could put it. So I don't know. It was just kind of an interesting array of attitudes that they had as they were going into this.
Yeah. And, Waxer and Boyle, the lead, the star clones of this episode here, are the best embodiment of this because, to your point, they were genetically cloned from
Mm-hmm.
Jango Fett. They lived in a very regimented society. There were no civilians other than like the Kaminoans there, but they were the ones putting them through their paces to become soldiers and all of this. So it's not like they were dealing with a fully integrated society by any stretch of the imagination. And then they get here and it's, they're getting this lecture from Obi-Wan and Cody about not destroying people's homes and check your targets, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. But it's not until they get to a city and they see, oh, this is someplace that somebody lived. And if they meet Numa and they see she's scared, and what chance does she have up against these battle droids and the like? Not to mention the creatures that are running around. And so it's a fresh perspective for them. As often as we kind of get like the discussion of the Jedi and how, they're not soldiers yet they fight in this war and it's kind of their undoing because they're doing stuff that they weren't meant to do in their service to the Force. There's, it's a reverse of growth for them. It's they lose their way. The clones, and we see this all the way through the Bad Batch, they become more and more human You know,
Mhm.
they come to understand the galaxy in a bigger way that their upbringing did not afford them before here.
Right.
And Waxer was particularly enlightened in it because he's all about helping Numa out, and he's all sympathetic about this. Boyle, I kind of get the feeling, is more representative of the every clone when it
Yeah.
comes down to it. It's just like, why do we have to help her? Why do we have to do this? She survived on her own this long. She can get along on her own. And so they worked really well as foils for each other in that regard.
They did. And what struck me too with that is, as you pointed out, these clones were genetically identical. So, what explains the fact that Waxer had more empathy and compassion than Boyle did? And they both had the same quote unquote upbringing, programming, if you
Yeah,
will,
there is no nature and
genetics.
nurture discussion to be had
Right,
here because it's all the same.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just it always strikes me so interesting how these clones can be so similar but yet so incredibly different, which we know that they are portrayed that way anyways, because even just the way that they have different tattoos, or Waxer has his head shaved and then Boyle has this like flat top going on. Some of them have goatees and some of them do different things to make themselves individualized, but this really kind of sets them apart emotionally in terms of how they're different.
Yeah, what's fun about the individualization is as much for the audience as it is for the clones.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, because they all have the same voice, like you said. Otherwise, they'd look identical. So we have to rely on different markings on their armor and different facial configurations when it comes to facial hair and the like. Uh, and that's great, but it also helps convey the difference between the Clone Wars and the movies, which is in the
Mhm.
movies, they were the equivalent of the battle droids. They were
Sure.
completely fungible. One was the same as the other, but they're not in the Clone Wars. It's a completely different message that they're trying to talk about here, which is they were bred for combat. They were bred for one purpose, to serve the Republic and the Grand Army. But they have lives. They are in fact individuals. Just because you create them this way and you made them less independent, so
Mhm.
that they wouldn't be as rebellious as Django, to borrow a line from Ian Malcolm, nature finds a way. They do
Yes.
develop their own personalities. They do develop their own desires and their own interests in this, and we see that time and time again. They have
Mhm.
an awful lot of similarities when it comes down to it. And I'm not just talking about appearance, but a lot of the ways they talk, act, accents, and the like. But still, there is they are never always going to be 100% the same.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, so we get Numa. This is the only time she appears in the Clone Wars, as you suggested, but she does show up elsewhere, voiced by Kat Tabor, which I did not know before until I noticed that in the credits when I was rewatching this. And she is the embodiment of the struggle of the Twi'leks here on Ryloth under Separatist control, and she's hiding in a house. She's discovered by Waxer and Boyle. She's very fearful of them until they take off their helmets, and then she immediately calls them Nira, which we come to find out from Obi-Wan later means brother. Talk about her a little bit. What did you think?
Well, she is literally and figuratively the poster child of the name of this episode, Innocence of
Right.
Ryloth. So she, as you said, embodies everything that is basically going on here, and the struggle for the loss of what happens during war. As I mentioned with the fortune cookie, the cost of war can never be truly accounted for. And, she obviously bites the finger of Boyle to protect herself because she doesn't know
Mm-hmm.
what else to think. And so, but then she realizes that Waxer and Boyle are going to help her. And so she kind of befriends them and takes them to safety herself. But she does end up witnessing a lot of things in the course of this, in terms of violence, in terms of loss and strife. And I thought it was awesome that when they went back to her home and Waxer really tried to console her with her Tuca doll. I believe this is the first time we've ever seen a Tuca doll in the Clone Wars, and then it of course becomes so popular. But
Right.
I just think it's so wonderful that Waxer just sort of knew intrinsically that this was something that could comfort her, because obviously he didn't grow up
Yeah.
with a Tuca doll. You know what I mean? And then of course way later in the Bad Batch, who gets a little Tuca doll? kind of thing. So it's a nice little theme, but Numa herself is again just the embodiment of the survival and the struggle for survival that the Twi'lek race had during these wars, and then again eventually becomes a freedom fighter herself because of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she couldn't be very old at all. I mean, she can speak and apparently intelligently enough, but
Hmm.
I'm thinking she's like 5, maybe 6 at the oldest. In
Sure.
this
Hmm.
episode here, she's really, really little. She's scared. She's starving. Like you said, she's the embodiment of the title of this episode, but and she's the symbol of the suffering on this and the resistance. So,
Right.
but she really does teach Waxer and Boyle about what it means to be a civilian caught up in all this. This
Yes.
is another big theme of this, and we kind of we talked about it with the clones here, is that it's not all just wars between droids and battle droids. It's the wars between clones and battle droids, I should say. And there are people who are at stake here. And it's episodes like this though that kind of make the opening crawl for Revenge of the Sith not make any sense for me, because we don't see the Republic taking over worlds and then using their civilians as shields, living shields for what's going on.
Right.
And in
Hmm.
this, or we don't see the Republic taking over worlds and then starving the population and decimating them in this fashion. But Wat Tambor, this is all an economical move for him. He took over Ryloth because of what it could do for the banking clan,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's it.
Yeah.
He doesn't care a lick about the Twi'leks when it comes down to it. Meanwhile, the Republic comes in to liberate these people. They are the freedom fighters in this one. So when we see the opening crawl that says that they're heroes on both sides, evils
That's-
everywhere, it's like, well, where are the heroes of the Separatists? I mean, you
Sure.
know, they try and talk about that a bit in later seasons, but I feel like episodes like this kind of undermined that sentiment.
Sure. Yeah, because at the heart of, the separatists is all the evil doing that you can possibly imagine. And, the only heroes that I can even imagine that would be on the quote unquote separatist side would even be more on the neutral end of things. You know what I
Right.
mean? So, worlds like Mandalore and so on and so forth, or Bonteri, Nina
Yeah, that's the one.
Bonteri. She's about the
Yeah.
only one that I can think of that really was trying to champion for the values that she thought the separatists were trying to represent, but was obviously misled.
Yeah, because Count Dooku had a very different public face from what his, you know, military commander role was there. I mean,
Absolutely.
he was pulling the wool over the galaxy's eyes when it comes there.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
the gutkurrs. These are the large ravenous insects that the separatist droids have corralled and starved to make them mad with hunger, so that they will attack anything that is in their way. They are largely resistant to blaster fire and very hard to defeat. But Obi-Wan eventually manages to corral a bunch of them by using the Force to calm them, and then they get them trapped in an alley, which they were then able to seclude them so they could go about their business and rescue these Twi'leks. I don't know that we ever saw them again after this, which is kind of too bad. But
Hmm.
um, cool insects.
Yeah.
I mean, they make for a really excellent part of the story.
Oh, for sure. Very creepy. And, they have this armor that is pretty much impenetrable, as you said, to blaster fire and everything. But I mean, classic Obi-Wan, he's not going to kill these creatures if he can absolutely help it. He obviously did that in the arena to protect himself and others, but there's always that part to Obi-Wan that, he realizes that these poor gutkurrs, they weren't doing this necessarily because they quote unquote wanted to. They were starved
Right.
to death. And so they were desperate. They were just feeding off of their own feral instincts, literally and figuratively. So Obi-Wan wasn't going to take it out on them if he could possibly help it. So,
Mhm.
so he definitely was true to his character there.
When I was doing some investigation into or research into the backstory of this episode, that scene was deliberately added for that reason, was just to show that just slaughtering creatures like this was not the Jedi way. And
Mm.
so Obi-Wan
Mhm.
found a way that was more true to the light. And they kind of strayed from this theme, but the idea was over the course of the series, they would show the Jedi kind of moving further and further away from that and doing things that they wouldn't have done just years earlier
Oh.
as they got caught up in this war. But this is an outstanding scene. I mean, Obi-Wan's got a lot of great moments in this
Oh, he
episode.
really
It's,
does.
when Waxer and Boiler come out of the tunnels with Numa, and they make mention like, we got a bit distracted
Yeah.
and detoured, and Obi-Wan's like, I can see what distracted you, and he gets right down on her level and starts
Mhm.
speaking to her in whatever you call the Twi'lek language, and and then as they, he talks to her and finds out that Numa can get them into where the civilians are being held. And I just love the scene. He shows up in on those holding pens. And you got that one battle droid who's grousing about having to clean up the floors. It's the worst job in the whole droid army. Kind of corny, but it is what it is. And then Obi-Wan closes him in there in the cell, but he's carrying Numa. It's a very protective, nurturing image for him. And it
Mhm.
just says a lot about the character of Obi-Wan. I mean, I don't want to say that it tells us anything new, but it reinforces what we really expect of Obi-Wan, which is nice considering how many times we talked about how kind of cold he could be about, like, astromechs are a dime a dozen. And,
Yeah.
when it came to the blue shadow virus, where it's like, we got to think about the big picture here. This is one world in the grand scheme of things, but here it is, he's for someone, Jedi who's supposed to have no attachment, and Obi-Wan really believes in the Jedi philosophy here. He was very, very kind to Numa here.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I had a lot of aha moments with Obi-Wan in this episode specifically. And as much as we've seen Obi-Wan in action with the Clone Wars and even in the movies and everything like that, for some reason, as I was watching this, rewatching this, I thought to myself, wow, fast forward to A New Hope when we have Obi-Wan in his little hovel and his, little tattered robes and then trying to talk to Luke, and Luke has no idea who this old wizard really is. And
Yeah.
just thinking about all the amazing adventures that Obi-Wan has had. I mean, just from even, the clones throwing the droid poppers, he's like, "I'll help you." And he uses the force to get them up and over the wall, and just the way that he was running through the fields, and as you said, just relating to people in general, like Numa being able to speak Twi'leki and just all of these different things. I mean, he really truly is an amazing character, and I just really treasured that for a lot of reasons just watching this particular episode. And I'm not quite sure why it struck me so hard, but it did.
I had a case of the Mandela effect with this, because when he talked to Numa in her own language, I kept waiting for one of the clones or someone to say to him, like, how do you know to speak that? And the response to be, well, when you travel the galaxy with Qui-Gon Jinn, you learn a few things. But it occurred to me that was a line from Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars. When he and Anakin went to that
Okay.
planet with, I can't remember the name of the species that were getting mutated by
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
banking
yeah.
clan with Wat Tambor,
Right.
as a
Yes,
matter of
yes.
fact. And I think that was the connection. That's why I got confused in my own mind. But it was this very similar type of moment here.
Mhm,
He
mhm.
picked up skills from, just so happens, traveling with the character that was played by Liam Neeson. Very particular set of skills makes him a nightmare to people like the Separatists. But anyway, yeah. So I appreciated that. I kind of like, Obi-Wan's always been one of my favorite characters, but I appreciate the diversity of him. While he's this accomplished warrior and stuff like that, he is the one that ends up taking out Grievous. He was selected for that reason. If you read the novelization, and because of his abilities and like that, he's he's a wise person. He has some faults, which he comes to recognize in the course of Revenge of the Sith and later The New Hope. But we get to see all these other different things he can do, and how hard he tries to do the right thing, even though it doesn't always work out.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting too is now that we're talking about this, Henry Gilroy was one of the producers slash directors of the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars
Mhm.
series as well. So, I mean, it's just kind of interesting that, it's coming back full circle. And that's maybe why we're having, like you said, this Mandela effect kind of a feeling about some of the things that we saw in this.
Indeed, indeed. And then the scene where he frees the Twi'leks and takes out the cannons. That is just so cool. I mean, he
Oh,
goes in there, he's using his lightsaber to break their shackles, and then the Twi'leks all run to safety. and then he hijacks one of the cannons and starts blowing up the other ones with it. But then the tactical droid gets the drop on him. But I'll talk about the tactical droid just in a minute, because this was the first episode that was produced that had a tactical droid in it. That droid lowers the cannon barrel. It's pointing right at Obi-Wan, which is ridiculous in its own right. That he's got Obi-Wan looking down the barrel of a cannon, and Numa's there, and the tactical droid's like, it's over for you, General Kenobi. Ha ha ha. It's just a mechanical stiff laugh ever. But then the Twi'lek won't stand for it. They come charging back out of the cave, and they jump up on that tank and haul him out of there and just rip him apart there. It's just the way that during their captivity, the Twi'leks are all like very tender towards each other, even though like the battle droids are putting boots in their backs or feet in their back. I guess battle droids don't wear boots, but you know what I mean. And and then they get this moment, and then it's just a really fantastic rescue.
It is, and it was so endearing when Obi-Wan tried to cover Numa's eyes from all of that, and she just grabs his hand and just rips it right off. Like, I want to see this.
I don't think he even noticed, because his hand's still sitting there where her eyes were, and then she's like holding it up and looking underneath about what's going on.
That's true.
Like, it's what you do with any kid. It's like you tell them not to look, and of course they're going to look. I was like, why shouldn't I look? But
of course,
that was a neat little poem. Yeah, we kind of skipped over the tactical droid here. So again, this was the first episode, according to the episode guide on StarWars.com, that was produced to feature a tactical droid. And this was clever. The reason why they came up with the tactical droids is that they needed something so that they weren't constantly beating Dooku, Grievous, and Ventress. Because how could you take these guys to be a real threat if they were always losing? And the tactical droids solve that problem. There could be a bunch of them, but they have different colors, different voices, slightly different ways of talking, but they're all based on probability and statistics when it comes to their strategies here. And so this one, TX-20, I reported what time Bauer was the first one we got. And he was all about, I think he calculated the odds of the clones being successful, something like 720 to 1 or whatever, very much like C-3PO in that regard. But, I really came to appreciate it after I've heard, because it's one of those things where, Saturday morning cartoons, the villain loses every single week, but somehow the main characters are supposed to be afraid of that villain that they beat all the time. And they alleviate that problem by giving us other figureheads that can be defeated on a weekly basis without having to develop a fully fleshed, brand new, flesh and blood character.
Right. And what's really cool though is that these tactical droids evolved into, the super tactical droids, and eventually we got Kalani, which was, the direct, and he was a general to for Count Dooku that was with us for quite a while. He was even in Rebels, wasn't he? Didn't he get into Rebels as well?
Yep.
So so you talk about evolution there, but I love that piece of trivia that was why that they were originally created. That's really cool.
Right. There's a really touching farewell between Waxer and Boyle and Numa. She makes sure that she gets a chance to give both of them a hug. Boyle's done a complete turnaround when it comes to her. He calls out to her. She hasn't even noticed him standing behind her, and he calls out to her and says, hey, stay out of trouble. And she runs up and gives him a hug. And his final message to her is like, hey, don't worry, we'll be back. And she's disappointed to see them go. And then she starts calling after them near and near, and that's when Obi-Wan tells them what that means. That it means brother, which is neat, because it's like, she's clearly noticing the similarity between them. But I think there's also the symbolic meaning of it, that in taking care of her, they are in a way brothers to her, in a societal sense.
I love that, especially because they all go on to have sort of this emotional bridge with each other, that they end up symbolizing each other in their armor. So, because Waxer ends up having a Twi'lek on his shoulder pauldron, and then Numa on her armor, she actually has Boyle in Orabesh on her, I think it's her left arm, and then she has a little Tuca doll on the front as well, in memory of like all of the stuff that happened with them.
Yeah, they did a great job carrying forward this episode and other stories.
For sure.
All right, but
that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I just want to hit a few Easter eggs that appeared in this episode. Up first, Kenobi's gunship, it was called the Crumb Bomber and had a image of Salacious Crumb dropping a bomb on the side. I thought that was
Oh
pretty
my
cool.
gosh, I have to go back and look for that. I totally missed that. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
you can easiest way to do is just go look at the episode guide for that one.
Okay.
One on the screen that the cannon that Obi-Wan takes over, coordinates are X. The X-axis is at 11. The Y-axis is at 38. So we get
Oh,
1138.
1138. Yeah.
And then at one point, the display screen that the tactical droid is using in Arabesh, it says comic relief. So
Oh my.
there you go. And
Those are
that's
great.
perfectly fitting for battle droids. Okay.
Absolutely.
Any other final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Honestly, I don't think I have any. This was just such a gratifying experience to get to relive this, and I'm so looking forward to the next episode as well.
Yeah. We're almost done with the season. Only 2 episodes left. So
Yeah.
you believe it? He's just tore right through it.
Yeah, we
Seemed like.
did.
Yeah. But well, we'd already done some of the episodes before, but here we go. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, with that, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our ongoing discussion of the Clone Wars each Monday right now until we get to Andor. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to make sure you get all of our discussions of the Clone Wars, then if you haven't done so, hit that subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice. And while you're at it, we could use your reviews, your likes, ratings, things like that. That helps others discover the show. And if you want to find more about what we've done, we go way back to 2019 with over 800 episodes, head over to retrozap.com. Our entire library can be found there, as well as all the other great shows that are on the RetroZap Podcast Network, covering everything from retro to animation and Star Trek and the like. So make sure you check that out. Jay, why don't you go ahead and remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online.
Sure. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we do maintain a Pinterest page with lots of boards dedicated to everything Star Wars. And we have our YouTube outlets, which include the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, share those out. And those also support reviews and interactions. So we'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. And you can also connect with us on TeePublic by purchasing one of 7 different show logo designs that are available with Podcast Stardust goods from A to Z and all of your sporting needs from household to fashion. And if you do end up purchasing something, every one of those sales do help to support the show. So if you'd like to check out that link is in our show notes.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know what you got going on in cosplay before we get out of here?
Sure. So as usual, you can always check out my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And so speaking of Twi'leks, you can catch me as 2 different versions of Hera. So I have the traditional Rebels version as well as the Ahsoka series version. And of course, my Ahsoka as well as my original concept Mandalorian, the Fourth Sister. And I'm working on a couple other things here for spring as well. So I have some upcoming appearances coming up here in March. So again, that's at j.snipscosplay.
All right, upcoming on the show this Wednesday, it is the next installment of World Between Worlds, where Jay rounds up the latest in Star Wars fashion and lifestyle products. And then on Friday, we end the week by taking a look at some recent Star Wars news. So thanks for listening to episode 846 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.